if more people tune in, then they can just tag along. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Erza, and I'm here with Noble 9. Very excited to have all of you join this webinar on assessing SLO maturity. We are here today with Amin Astaneh. He will be talking about a practical model for driving reliability outcomes. Very excited for this webinar. We've been preparing a lot. Amin has been preparing a lot, so I hope you all will enjoy it. Couple of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or we have a Q&A dedicated box for it. Amin will take the questions either towards the end or as we see fit during the webinar. So feel free to drop questions. If you cannot stay through the entire webinar, then we will also make sure to send the recording to everyone, but we encourage you highly to stay for the dedicated Q&A session and have a fun discussion with us. I hope you all enjoy this, and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much. Amin, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Erza. Thank you, Noble 9. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Amin Astaneh. So today I'm going to show you how to level up your use of SLOs, get maximum return on investment on them through learning a simple assessment process. So a little bit about me. I'm a consultant. I run a one-person consultancy called Moto. I specialize in helping teams better run their production systems using DevOps and SRE. I've been in the industry for almost 20 years, and prior to starting my consultancy, I launched a DevOps and SRE program at a tech unicorn. Also spent a few years at Meta working on service management in their production engineering org. And as part of that, I was a very early adopter of SRE practices and more specifically the use of SLOs. So let's get right into it. If you're attending, it's very likely you know quite a bit about SLOs, right? You might already be using them. You might understand SRE. You understand the history, but let's level set here. So all the way in the beginning of SRE, Ben Trainer-Schloss, who was the founder of site reliability engineering in Google, he introduced 12 practices. These were the guiding principles behind SRE, and there are 3 of them that are specific to SLO. And they were, number 1, have SLOs for your service, straightforward. Next, measure and report performance against them. And then finally, use error budgets and gate launches on them. So basically, based on SLO performance, we're making decisions about when we're shipping features to production. So this is proof SLOs were a central part of SRE from day one. But let's unpack this idea. What does this actually mean? Well, number 1, we aren't aiming for 100% reliable services. We're accepting the fact that there is going to be some instability, right? And we are specifying the level of instability that we want and tolerate based on 2 things. Number 1, what do customers actually expect in terms of reliability of the service? And secondly, profitability. The more 9s that you add to your SLOs, the more expensive it becomes. So we want to pick values that make sense and allow us to run a business. And the key here is that we're using our current reliability metrics, our SLO performance, to make business decisions. And yes, we've known about this for at least a decade, and Google has had this knowledge for over 20 years, but it's important for me to make sure we're all level set. Okay, great. So we've remembered SLO, but let's remember why it exists. What does SLO even do for us at the business level? Well, number 1, we are able to measure the health of our systems and also quantitatively measure customer success. We're no longer flying blind when it comes to understanding how our systems are performing. With that information, we can do some very interesting things, such as creating a balance between what product wants, getting as many features out the door as possible, and what engineers care about and what the SREs care about and the people that are on call care about, right? Preventing those incidents from happening that wake them out of bed and is just a huge pain in the butt. But from the business angle, I think this is really what SLOs do for the business. We are enabling product to ship features that bring in new customers, while at the same time making sure that we're protecting our existing customers, keeping them happy, making sure they don't churn. So we're enabling the deals while protecting the renewals. So SLO enables the business to win directly. Okay, great. So cool. Again, we've had this concept for over a decade now. And again, 2 decades at Google, but what is the reality of SLO in practice, right? Like what do we actually experience in real life when we're trying to roll out SLO? And typically it's not as glamorous. So let's go back to the original 3 practices and see where we fare. Okay, number 1, let's have an SLO or SLOs for a service. Great, fine, we do this, wonderful. But what about measuring and reporting performance against them, right? Do we actually have the necessary observability to capture our SLO metrics as defined? Do we have a dashboard with current metrics? Are we actually looking at the dashboard? I actually saw a team in my career that said they had SLOs and they didn't have any dashboards, which was very baffling to me, but apparently they said they did. So we can't take this for granted. Are we actually measuring it? Are we reporting it? And then finally, are we actually using error budgets and SLO performance to make decisions with? Right? I'm not necessarily saying, hey, if your error budget's spent, you should stop all releases to production, but do you have at least some rules that you consistently follow in response to your error budget performance? So let's talk about a few scenarios that you probably have seen when dealing with SLOs and see if maybe you can put some messages, maybe some reactions, and tell me if this is maybe has happened in your career. Let me know if any of this sounds familiar. So let's imagine we have our SRE team. They really want to make change across the organization. And as part of that, they start to create a reliability program. And as part of that, they institute a rule saying every team needs to have SLOs. Great, good idea. But the engineering team, all they do is they define a handful of SLOs, they make a dashboard, they set it and forget it, and they never look at the dashboard again. They're just checking the box to comply with some reliability program, but they're not bought into it. I wonder if that is familiar to you. Let's look at another example. So let's imagine we have our SRE on a team, super excited about rolling out SLOs. They get them defined, they get them dashboarded, they write a bunch of documentation, they go on vacation for a month. SLO isn't at all used, consulted, utilized by the engineering team. So what I'm saying is that SLO, for this team at least, isn't a team process. It's not part of the culture. It's just something that one person is championing on the team, right? I wonder if that is at all familiar to you. What about this one? That product managers aren't involved in the process at all. Maybe the SLOs are defined by the engineering team in isolation. Even worse, maybe the SREs define the SLOs in isolation, right? And product managers are definitely not using the dashboard. They're definitely not using the metrics to influence roadmap prioritization. They might just see it as, hey, this just slows me down. I want to ship features. I don't want anyone to tell me to stop, right? I wonder if that is familiar. And then finally, let's be real. Who in this group has actually spent the error budget on things other than incidents, right? Like performance regressions, outages. If any of you have actually said, you know what, I'm going to spend my error budget on something strategic, I would be very surprised. So that is the ultimate goal of SLO, right? That we are taking that instability and using it for things, but very rarely have I ever seen that done. So here's the big, cold, hard truth about SLO in the industry. Just because you have them for your team, even across the organization, it doesn't mean you're actually gaining any benefit from them. You're not getting a return on investment. So let's think about this. I think all of us can agree that having a spoiler on our car does not make our vehicle capable of racing, right? So similarly, just because we have SLOs for our production service, it doesn't mean we're doing SRE. It doesn't mean we're making our services more performant. It doesn't mean that we're improving the customer experience. It doesn't mean we're improving the business at all. What it means is that maybe you have a dashboard. Maybe you have a dashboard. And let's get real. When was the last time the team collectively looked at this dashboard? When was the last time that the SLOs were changed in response to new current conditions or new features. And really, when was the last time that you used your SLOs to make actual business decisions? So again, hard facts here. When you're rolling out an SRE program at your company, even if you're just doing SLOs for your team, it isn't going to be enough that your team has them, right? Because here's the big question that we have to answer. And I'm telling you that we need to answer this question all the time. Are our SLOs any good, right? Do they actually map to customer expectations? Are these SLOs based in reality, right? So, and of course, this problem gets even better because let's imagine that we're a software engineering director, maybe the director of SRE or the VP of engineering. You're responsible, accountable for reliability outcomes. So it's going to be a big enough of a job to evaluate the SLO for a single product or single team. But let's imagine having to evaluate the SLO posture and maturity across a whole bunch of teams. If you're working at a very, very large company and you're a VP of engineering for that company, you can have dozens. So how do you do this work given all of the gaps that I've mentioned before? So this here, the act of understanding how mature and how effective your SLOs are at scale in your organization, it's a huge gap. This isn't something that actually really exists in the SLO literature today. So I'm a consultant. I specialize in SRE. I spend a lot of time looking at SLO implementations for many, many teams. And this is new territory even for me. I mean, let's think about this. We have endless books and blog posts on how to create SLOs and how cool they are. I've created some of that content. But again, how do we know if our SLOs are any good? How do we know if they are helping us enable the business to succeed? So this is a huge opportunity for us as well. If we don't have this process, well, let's create one. So here's what we need. Now that we've stated the problem, let's talk about the solution. What we want is a simple and repeatable way to quickly assess and understand the effectiveness, the maturity of SLO over potentially dozens of teams, while at the same time providing a clear roadmap on how to level up, how to improve them, how to make them effective at your business. So we want something that is low touch, high impact. Ideally, we want something that we can just simply have a single conversation with the engineering team about and be able to understand what's going on. So to do that, let's take a look at some prior art. We're going to take a look at something called the capability maturity model. Old school method from the 1980s. It was developed by the Department of Defense, United States. And what they did with it is they used it to assess software engineering teams that were government contractors. And what it did is it scored a team's capabilities, various capabilities from a scale of 1 to 5. It's still used today. It's been refined by Carnegie Mellon University under capability maturity model integration and is in active development and refinement. So let's take a look at CMM here. And it's a 5-point scale. So we can score a capability, a practice, a process from 1 to 5. So level 1 would be chaotic. There isn't a process in place. Nothing's documented. Things are being done differently. Things aren't being done at all. Level 2, we have some documentation in place. We could ask somebody to implement the process. Maybe. Level 3, it's now a standardized thing. It is now something that the team actively does. Level 4, we're measuring the results from that process and we're able to demonstrate that it's actually creating real results. And then level 5, we're using those metrics to implement improvements for the process. We have a continuous improvement loop that is happening around the process that we're describing, right? So here's the idea. Okay, we have this 1 through 5 scale thing, right? Well, what if we used it? What if we adopted CMM and we used it to assess a team's SLO implementation? And that is precisely what we're going to talk about for the rest of this webinar. I am going to introduce to you all a 1 to 5 scale for SLO, and we're going to include examples of key evidence that allows us to help confirm a particular maturity level. Now, the evidence that I'm stating, it isn't a checklist, but these are clues. And yes, Chris, this is a recorded session, so we'll be able to share it with you after the session. Good question. So we will continue and start from level 1. You're very welcome. All right, so level 1, SLOs do not influence the team's behavior, how we monitor or alert, or how we prioritize work. So here's the bottom line. If SLOs do not have any effect on the decisions that your team makes, you don't have an SLO practice, right? What you have is monitoring and a dashboard. So let's take a look at some evidence of what it would look like for a team to be at level 1. So for example, I recently worked with a team in my consulting practice where they do have SLOs and they do have a dashboard, and they were more than happy to show it to me, but those SLOs haven't been revised in years. The person that defined them doesn't even work for the company anymore. When alerts come in from SLO performance, those alerts are ignored. They're not even used for the incident response process. And on top of that, the SLO dashboards haven't been reviewed at all for a long time. So even with a dashboard, even with alerts, it's a level 1 service. So here is some example evidence. We don't have SLO, straightforward. If they're not doing the process, of course they're level 1. Or maybe they're rolling them out, but they're not using them yet. Okay, fine, level 1. If they have them, but they're not using them, still level 1. But there's some additional pieces of evidence that I think are really interesting tells. Where are your alerts coming from? So ideally, the primary source of your alerts should be your SLO performance, because by definition, your SLO performance maps to the customer experience. And if the customer experience isn't good, you want to get out of bed, right? So if you're using different sources of metrics instead of your SLOs, very likely you're level 1. Maybe you're thinking about mean time to resolve rather than SLO, because SLO is a way better metric than MTTR by almost every standard. And then finally, a very important tell, if customers are filing tickets to support and support has to escalate to the engineering team, and then the engineering team responds, meaning the engineering team is blind to what's happening in production, very likely they're a level 1 service. So let's level up a little bit. Let's move on to level 2. So at this phase, we have some SLOs. They have been defined, they've been collected, and they're on a dashboard. So we have a dashboard that we can look at. So this means that at this phase of the game, the engineering team did enough work to define and measure the SLOs. They have some processes around them, but they're not necessarily using those processes consistently. They're not benefiting from SLOs consistently. So let's discuss some evidence here. Number 1, we have the observability, right? We have the traces, we have the logs, we have the time series data. It's automatically being gathered from our production systems. We have an observability platform where we can query to get SLI data, right? On top of that, there's some artifacts. There's proof that someone went through the process of defining SLOs. There's a dashboard. There's some code. There's some observability. There's some tooling. There's some documentation around how the SLOs were set, how to consume them, where the dashboard is, right, and how to review. And there's a manual process for reviewing SLO performance. So at least there's an intention that, hey, we're going to take a look at this and start to use it for decision making. But here are the gaps. Right now, SLO is driven by the SRE, typically. It's one person, they're rolling the process out. It hasn't been integrated to the team's day-to-day yet. Maybe we have alerting tied into SLO performance. Maybe even alerts are being sent, but the team isn't using them 100% of the time. Maybe some of the time they're saying, yep, that's an incident. I'm going to go ahead and respond, but maybe they're ignoring some of them. So it isn't total buy-in. And then similarly, when we violate the SLO, the team isn't following through with, hey, maybe we should replan the next sprint. Maybe we need to pause and look at our roadmap and make sure we're incorporating performance improvements into our sprints. So we have the SLO process, but we're not using it all the way. All right, so next, level 3. This is where I want most teams to typically reach, especially startups. Like, just get level 3 going, and then you can start iterating towards 4 and 5 over an extended period of time. So this is where you start to actually get benefit from SLOs. Where we are actually using them to wake us up in the middle of the night if the error budget is being spent quickly, and we're actually using SLO performance to help us prioritize our work? Or do we need to do improvements? Can we focus full steam ahead on features? We're using SLO to make those decisions. So again, at level 3, the team is going to actually get value from the SLO process. But here's the gap. At this phase, they don't know with certainty if the SLOs themselves are correct. So let's look at some evidence. So at this stage of the game, typically, if this is a company with a bunch of teams, the company is like, okay, we have a standard, some rules in place about, hey, if you spend your area budget, this is what you're going to do. And we have evidence that the team is consistently following it. Similarly, SLO performance is tied into our monitoring and alerting. We're getting paged. The alerts are going to an on-call rotation, and it is a trusted source for our alerts rather than other operational metrics. We're actually using the SLOs as gospel as to whether or not our service is performing well or not. And additionally, we're actually looking at SLO performance again between engineers and PMs are looking at it together, and they're using that data as part of team retrospectives, and they're definitely using that data when they're planning future work. So level 3, it's going to require more than level 2 because we're actually using the error budget to drive decisions, and we're making it a company practice. So at this phase, we're putting our money where our mouth is. A little bit more evidence. It's not just the SRE anymore. We have several team members that are actually implementing SLO, making sure that the process is being followed. But here are the gaps. We don't have a pattern of the team evaluating whether or not the SLOs are in fact effective, if they map to actual customer expectations yet. And on top of that, there might actually be proof that, hey, there were some customer tickets being surfaced on reliability and performance issues while the SLOs themselves are green, meaning there is a mismatch between what we're measuring and how we're measuring it and what customers actually care about. So that is a clue you're at a level 3 rather than a level 4. So let's move on to level 4 here. We're leveling up. If we're at level 4, we're in a good spot. So at this stage of the game, level 4, SLOs are part of how the team does work. It is integrated to the day-to-day on how the team does work. But when SLOs are changed, when the processes are changed, it is happening in reaction to something. Maybe it's happening in reaction to an incident, or it's happening in reaction to feedback from a customer. It isn't something that is being actively practiced on a proactive basis. So here's some evidence. So at this point, the company has actual guidance on how to roll out SLO for a team. They might have onboarding tools. They might have documentation. They might have some automation. They might have a centralized dashboard like Noble 9, for example, where the SLOs are being represented and stored. And typically you have a team that is responsible for maintaining or owning this function. So this is going to be typical behavior for larger organizations that are really caring about SLO. As part of that, you have centralized reporting of SLO performance. So at this point, the C-level, at least seniors in engineering, are looking at the SLO performance of all the teams to make sure that they're all on track. And SLO is now part of the PDLC process, as in we don't turn on a new production system until we have SLOs defined for it, right? We're not taking money from customers until we know what we're promising and monitoring that we are making those expectations. We're meeting those expectations. And those SLO dashboards are up all the time. We're looking at them when we're on call. We're looking at them when we're shipping to understand the effects of our changes on production. More evidence. Maybe, I'm not saying that this is a guaranteed piece of evidence, but teams might say, you know what? I don't want to ship any new feature work if our error budget has been spent. Why not programmatically do that? Why not have automatic error budget enforcement as part of your CD pipeline? That would be clear evidence that you're getting to a level 4 system, because now that's part of the team's process and maybe the organizational process. On top of that, teams are starting to look at, well, why is our error budget being spent, right? And they are systematically identifying the sources of error budget spend, creating tickets in the backlog, prioritizing them, working on them, and basically, taking care of all of the various sources of instability for the system. Very clear clue that we're starting to approach level 4. Also, the definition of SLO, the validation of SLO, is a cross-functional practice where we're pulling in teams like customer success to make sure, hey, are SLOs actually matching what customers expect? Do you have examples of tickets that contradict what we're measuring? Right? So SLO isn't something that's just happening in the corner by the engineering team, but it is something that is being considered by the entire organization. Now, here's the gap. What differentiates it from level 4 and 5? They're only changing the SLOs in response to something. It isn't something that they're actively looking at and making evaluation and modification and adjustment and improvement part of their work, right? And again, automatic gating of releases, that's a piece of evidence, but it's not a requirement. It would be nice though. All right, and then finally, level 5, top level maturity. This is where we want to go ultimately, especially for the services that really matter to the business. So this is where we are continuously assessing our SLOs, and we're just tweaking them, changing them as we need to improve performance. We want to make sure that we have as close to an approximation of customer experience as possible, right? And we're using those SLOs to drive more business outcomes, particularly revenue or cost or things like that. And finally, the capstone behavior. Remember what we talked about, who actually spends the air budget on stuff that's strategic? Well, a level 5 service, they've gotten to the place where they can do that. It isn't just incidents. The service is mature enough that they can look at the SLO and say, hey, we can introduce a feature that introduces a little bit of latency. That's totally cool because it fits in our air budget. Let's do that. Let's be the first to market. Let's be competitive, right? So let's look at there's just a few items here for evidence, but let's check this out. Company-wide standard for reviewing SLOs. So it isn't enough that you set them. The business is setting an expectation that, hey, once a quarter, you're looking at your SLOs, you're meeting and discussing them, you're figuring out where the gaps are, you are iterating on them, you're changing the data sources, you're changing the definitions, maybe you're tightening them, right? And as part of that, once the company has created that standard, the team's actually doing it. And so they are proposing and implementing improvements. It is part of doing business. It isn't done in response to anything. It is part of planned work. It is part of the software engineering practice. And then finally, the capstone behavior, a hallmark of a mature SLO practice, is that the team is saying, hey, we have spare air budget. What are we going to spend it on, right? Because air budget is meant to be spent, and it's meant to be spent strategically. But that requires you to have a service that is mature enough where SLO air budget is not typically being spent on outages, right? Okay, so that is the maturity scale for assessing our SLO posture, the SLOs themselves, as well as how we're using them. And yeah, I said a bunch of stuff. So here's the question. Well, you're probably asking me, Amin, well, how do I quickly assess a team, right? Because I'm a very busy person. I run an engineering team. I want to know where I'm at. I want to get the value out of this webinar. Very valid, right? So here are a set of questions that I typically use when assessing the SLO maturity of a given team. And as you will see, these questions aren't really all that hard, right? So do you have SLOs? Yeah. If you do, great. Show me the dashboard. Show me the evidence you have the dashboard. Let's say they have a dashboard. Is the team readily, knowledgeable about where the dashboard is? I actually had a team that said, yeah, we have SLOs, but I forgot where the dashboard is stored. Are they using that dashboard in that case? So can they produce the dashboard? Ask them when they use it, how they use it, what behaviors are they using it for? How long ago were those SLOs defined? Are they being changed by the team? Are they being reviewed, right? And importantly, what happens if you have a high burn rate, meaning you have an incident? What are teams doing in responses to those SLOs? Are they getting paged? Are SLOs a key part of their incident response process, the key source of alerts? And then finally, what happens when the air budget's spent? Do they have a business rule or procedure to follow? Are they prioritizing the work differently? Is product getting involved? Is the roadmap being changed? So with these types of questions, and there are only 6 of them, I am able to quickly assess if a team falls between levels 1 and 3, right? Because if a team is level 4 and 5, they typically don't need my help, so I don't see teams that are like that. But these questions will help you assess from levels 1 to 3. Okay, Amin, you're thinking, well, I have a team, I have SLOs. How can I level up my SLOs real quick? What do you think about that? I have some guidance for you, which is number one, if you don't have your SLOs on a dashboard, definitely get working on that. Make sure you have the sufficient observability to get them represented easily on a dashboard and be able to see them up to date all the time. Make sure you tie those metrics into alerts when you have high burn events, meaning it's an incident. And if the air budget gets spent, make sure you have rules as to what to do when that happens. Are you reprioritizing your roadmap? And make sure you're consistently sticking to that process, right? We're looking at the dashboard often. We're meeting about it. We're talking about it. We're understanding the air budget spenders. We're tracking work to address them. It's being prioritized in the backlog, right? It isn't just, in a Jira queue somewhere, never to be seen. They're actually being acted on. And we're getting validation from the support team as to whether or not our SLOs are effective. So if you're doing these behaviors, you're very, very quickly on your way to being a level 3. And if you need to, but levels 4 and 5, very, very important for larger organizations, but those are going to require organization-wide governance, some structure, some departmental buy-in, definitely C-level buy-in to roll out SLO in a mature way like that. And one of the key pieces of advice is get product management involved. Product management, they need to be able to state, the vision of the product, what customers are expecting, what problems they're trying to solve, and for them to buy into the idea that, hey, if the air budget gets spent, what should I do about that? How should I respond? And how can I enable the engineering team to ship as much as possible while keeping our existing customers happy? So I spoke a lot of words. Here's the payoff. What are you going to get by building a more mature SLO process? What you get is a continuously improving feedback loop here. So what you end up with is, hey, for every change that you ship, you now have clear feedback as to what the effects of your changes were on production. And if it was a really bad change, you get paged for it, right? And if it's a minor thing, you're investigating it. You're understanding what's going on. With that information, you're then doing a retrospective. You're gaining clear understanding as to the effects of your changes on the production system expressed by SLO and why. So now you understand what took place and why, and potential gaps in your product or in your infrastructure. We'll do a question in just a minute. I'm about to wrap up. Thank you for raising your hand. And then the big payoff is we're taking those lessons and we're using it to plan our work. Maybe we need to plan next sprint all the reliability work necessary to improve the state of the SLO, or maybe we need to just make sure we have steady state of work coming into the sprints to make sure that we're on track, right? So we have this feedback loop. Every time we make a change to the system, we're getting feedback and we're learning from it. And what do we get from this? I guarantee you, I bet my whole career that if you follow this process, you are going to improve the state of your service. You're going to have higher levels of reliability. You're going to get organizational buy-in, and you're going to enable your product or service to actually enable the business to win, right? Revenue, cost, all that stuff. Okay. Thank you so much. I know I covered a lot of ground in a very, very short period of time, so I am going to pause for questions and feedback. Thank you. And your question is, are there any list of practices that can be used to evaluate the level and improve the level? That's a very good question. So that is very much the set of evidence, right? So the evidence suggests patterns of behavior that map to, for example, level 3, that we have SLOs and that we're using them to actually fire off alerts if air budget's being spent. We're using them. So that is what the evidence is for. Oh, as in the CMMI model? Oh, that's a very good question. So one of the things I want to do after this webinar is probably put up some kind of code repo and formalize this and make it into something that can be contributed to and shared. But that's a very, very good question. If you're looking for like a formal CMMI, I think the next part of this conversation is to create something that can be contributed to. Very, very good question. Adrian, thank you very much for the next question. How do you advise setting up the air budgets for the teams that you consulted? Oh, so interesting. So yes, I actually have done a webinar in the past that actually turned into materials that I use when working with Noble 9. They're one of my clients, believe it or not. And part of that is the process of having a conversation with the engineering team as to what does it even mean for the service to be up, right? From the customer perspective, what do they care about? And then converting that into aspirational SLIs and SLOs that in an ideal world, what would you measure and what would it be? Then measure your system, see the gap, and then start picking an SLO that makes sense, given the limitations of your service, how your team is staffed, and so on, and slowly iterate towards the aspirational. So that's the typical process that I follow. Good question. I hope that was useful. I'm going to keep going down the questions here in chat. VJ, we currently have SLO alerts that trigger major incidents. How can we tag low priority incidents that may contribute to SLO impact but are not significant enough to trigger SLO based alerts? Very interesting. So you have one of the things that I helped define when I was at Meta was the concept of service criticality. So our service can have a set of SLOs, right? But service criticality is the concept that if a particular service goes down or doesn't meet SLO performance, this is the maximum impact to the business, right? So if you have an ancillary service that doesn't, affect the customer all that much, maybe in terms of SLO impact, you might say, okay, if we're dealing with a SLO exhaustion or burn, maybe it's a business hours only response, right? So the answer that I have to that question is evaluate how important that protection service is to the overall business and set your incident response from there. Good question. I'm going to keep going with the remaining time here. So we have Marcelo. Thank you for the question. Does Noble 9 have the data to share an end-to-end story use case with a company, perhaps with anonymized tech details, has navigated the evolution of this maturity model? It would be nice to hear from a somewhat complex example in a more realistic scenario where teams have more complex supported technology matrix. Oh, this is very interesting. It is a loaded question, but that's okay. So this is a very new concept. I know that Noble 9 is using it in terms of like understanding where customers are, but I'm typically not using CMM as part of like the practice. I'm not talking to customers saying, oh, you're a level 1 or a level 3. It is something that I'm using in my head in order to understand where they need to go next. But that's an interesting question, and I'd recommend reaching out to Noble 9, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that because that is an interesting question. But I'm not using this model as like a process that companies are in fact using. It's more of a evaluation as a consultant. Okay, next question by Luis Pais de Lima. Is it normal to initiate monitoring the API layer and using it as a starting point for SLO definitions? Asking because sometimes it's harder to start defining the exact user journeys composed of more than one API. Oh, very interesting. Yes, you can tackle it from both. I mean, typically I like to have the engineering team look at it from the customer's perspective, because then at least the metrics that you are choosing closely resemble what they're expecting. But when we're talking about backend API systems, I think the principle is the same. You're saying, okay, I'm an API. Who's using my API? What are they expecting from me? Right? Based on those top level expectations, and you may reveal that your success rate of certain API endpoints or latency of certain API endpoints matter more than others. But it's typical for each team to have their own SLOs, and then also have a top layer SLO for the top level SLO for the product that you're monitoring as well. Because you're right, like it's hard to express a user journey and then have it mapped to a particular API. But I typically go at both directions. All right. Question from Wilson. Thank you for the question. Any advice on how to move from SLOs based on error rate or latency towards one top level composite SLO? I feel that having separate SLOs based on error rate and latency means to having simply too many SLOs to track. Well, I do understand that is a Noble 9 feature these days. They do have the concept of composite SLOs and being able to programmatically define them and then create like a scoring or percentage contribution to SLOs. But that's it. Yeah. So that's one potential solution. That is a feature. But in terms of top level, I think it goes back to what Luis's question was, which is if you have a top level set of SLOs for a given product, you then understand the health of the overall product, and then you can use the underlying SLOs for all of the teams to help explain why the product is performing in a certain way. So yes, you have a lot of SLOs to track, but I think the answer here is which you're creating a hierarchy of them based on the architecture of your product or service. Very, very good question. I'm going to continue with remaining ones. Adrian, thank you for your question. What if those teams are still at the phase where they ship their code over the fence and leave it to operations to deal with production? How to incentivize them to care about SLIs and SLOs? Isn't that the question? That is very much the reason why I have a career, is to help transition teams from the sysops, dev versus ops, wall of confusion mentality to a more collaborative, more DevOps, more SRE practice. How do you incentivize them to care? Make the engineers be on call. If the engineers are on call, then they have skin in the game. If they have skin in the game, they're going to feel the discomfort. If they feel the discomfort, they're going to act. I've also seen situations where operations that basically said, listen, we're not on call for the service anymore. It is unsustainable. We can't do it. We're not going to take it as part of our scope. So there are some hardball things that you can do. Adrian, feel free to reach out to me on my contact here, and we can talk a little bit about that because I know what that's all about. Good question. Lakeisha Gribble, thank you for your question. We use Noble 9. How can we more effectively engage our product teams in the ongoing monitoring and management of these SLOs? Very interesting. Yes, absolutely. Very big thing. This is actually one of the things that I work with them on, is helping their clients with this. So how do you engage our product teams? Well, the way that I do it is, let me talk about this agnostic to any vendor or practice. Assuming you have an SRE program or some reliability program, or at least a handful of people that care about the SLO practice, you're going to want to, well, in a sense, create a consulting model with them where you are working with those teams directly in order to guide them through the process of rolling out SLO. And there's two bits about this. One is providing the assistance and the help. But two, is there incentive? Is there an incentive structure driving teams to implement SLOs? So if you don't have the C-level saying, listen, every team needs SLOs and we need to have some, visibility and driving improvement outcomes, it's going to be hard for teams to engage with you. But let's say you do, you're going to want some experts in your group to help assist you or assist teams with implementing SLOs, coaching them through the process of defining them, helping them maybe in how to instrument their code to reveal those metrics, and then ultimately get them into Noble 9. So I would recommend reaching out to Noble 9 after this call and discuss this, because this is something I know quite a bit about. Maybe we can help you. All right. Let's see if there are any other questions. It looks like we have exhausted all the questions. Any follow-ups with the remaining time? Glad to share.
Thank you so much, Amin, and thank you so much, everyone. This was an amazing presentation. if you have more follow-up questions, I really enjoyed this discussion, by the way. If you have more follow-up questions, and especially the ones who had specific Noble 9 questions, uh, um, reach out to our team. We will reach out to you too, but make sure to reach out to our SLO experts and we'll answer your question and show you more of this. And the slides, yes, we can share the slides when we share the recording, which will happen probably tomorrow, the latest tomorrow. So we could do that definitely. And yeah, please stay on the outlook for other webinars. We have some other fun webinars coming up that we're planning right now. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Amin. You did an amazing job.